Hi, Scott from Heretical Sraffa here. What we're going to do today is we're going to introduce the analytical framework from which we can begin to understand the surplus producing model. In the previous two lectures, we have looked at the subsistence production. We saw that in the subsistence production, there was integrated production. You have the productive consumption of different basic products produced by different single product basic industries. We looked at the 2 commodity wheat iron case and the 3 commodity wheat iron pig case. And what we saw was that in the subsistence model, although we do have integrated production, we have own and cross exchanges of our inputs in terms of the A matrix of productivity, and the defining characteristic, I should say, of the subsistence model is the fact that the gross output, which we denoted Q, were exactly equal to the total inputs of the commodity used as means of production in the entire system for all industries and for all commodities. And that was the nature of the subsistence model. We said that it was physiocratic sterile in the sense that it represented Quenet's sterile manufacturing sector in the tableau économique. We're going to come back to Quenet here. We're going to come back to the analogs and the parallels with the economic table in Sraffa's surplus producing model in the 2 commodity case. I think what I'd like to do here now, however, is I would like to introduce generally the importance of net output in an economic system. And the easiest way, or an easy way, I don't know if the easiest, but certainly an easy way to conceive of this, at least for me, to both understand and try to explain, is in terms of the 1 commodity model. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you, this is going to be the first of a couple of lectures that kind of get us into into an appreciation of the understanding of the introduction of net output into our model. And then in the 1 commodity case, and in so doing, we can just consider net output generally. And in the 1 commodity case, this becomes very transparent because you don't have to deal with the issues of cross exchanges and different types of commodities. You could just conceive of the aggregate or the 1 commodity, and the 1 commodity aggregate parallels are very profound. So that's where we're going to start today. And then once we introduce the net output and we look at the different expressions of the net output, specifically on the income account side, we're going to be looking at the value added expressed as the sum of wage and profit revenues. And on the output account side, we're going to see that the value of the net output is going to be equal to the sum of consumption and investment expenditures. And so here we have at the introduction of the 1 commodity case, right? We're not even in the 2 commodity model. We have the relationship of the net output as both a net added of value as well as a net productivity of output, and the relationships that are associated therein. Duncan Foley and Thomas Michael in their 1999 book, Growth and Distribution, first edition, for a second edition, we talk about the growth distribution schedule. And so we're going to see that the wage relation is going to give rise to the distribution schedule. The income relation is going to give rise to the distribution schedule, and the output relation is going to give rise to the growth schedule. And they're formally equal to one another, but they convey different economic concepts, one being output account, the other being input account, expressions of the economic system. And of course, the relationship between the 2 is what's important. But this is where we start, okay? So we're going to have to start with the notion of the net output, generally speaking, okay? And so I call this a 1 commodity model of net productivity. So I have here, I'm going to try to make it big. I know that ideally we get to the better lecture hall, but this is convenient for me to throw these out here to see if anybody has interest maybe in thinking about these matters. One thing I will say, I think that evidence is shown, and you professors and teachers out there know this, you got to hear things at least 3 times to really absorb it, okay? So hopefully instead of 3 of the same video, I'm going to give you this one, and then we're going to be working the more proper PowerPoint, etc., for the next ones, etc. And we'll put them out there, and the idea is for us to begin to understand the nature and content of Sraffa's book, all right? And one disclaimer while I'm thinking about it, I was looking at the last video. When I say Sraffa said this and Sraffa said that, disclaimer is I'm not telling you what Sraffa said. That's my interpretation of the matter, and I want to leave it at that. I think it might be what Sraffa said, Okay, but I don't speak for anyone, and certainly I don't speak for Sraffa. I think that I'm going to try to catch myself as I'm doing that throughout. It's good for me to do that because I think it's important for all of us to do that, frankly, because then we can be clear about what we're doing here. It becomes not soothsaying and figuring out what Sraffa said, well, again, which I don't find that interesting. A little harsh, it is interesting, but I don't think it's the point. But I think that finding out what we can do with the material is important. So we begin with the notion of the round of production, okay? So this is what I have here. I have shown here the idea of the round of production, right? And so here I have subsequent rounds. I have the round of production T, I have the round of production T plus 1, and then I have round of production T plus 2. That should be a 2 right there. Dot, 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 round of production T plus 3, on and on. And one of the things that we're concerned about in looking at these classical-oriented circular flow type systems, as opposed to the neoclassical framework where you have factor inputs that are used to produce a different finished output, we're looking at an input-output relationship where the same kind of inputs are going to be used and produced for the same kind of outputs. What Sraffa says, the production of commodities by means of commodities. Now, that means that what you're going to have is now remember, Sraffa says commodities, so that means that the use values are going to be for sale. And I've thought that the idea of production for commodities by means of commodities means that it's going to be the production of use value outputs for sale. Let me say this again. The production of use value outputs for sale by means of use value inputs which are themselves purchased. And so you have the purchase of the input side and the sale on the output side, which constitutes the dual relation or a dual relation or a differentiated, if you will, relation between within the value form. And we saw in the last lesson on the three commodity subsistence model that the terminological note, Sraffa speaks about this dual relationship, and he says we can erroneously think of it as on the demand and the supply side, and it is an error to think that way, but I think what Sraffa is getting at, again, my opinion, is that in that terminological note, right, section 7 or paragraph 7 of production of commodities, in the terminological note, Sraffa speaks about the relations there, right? So in any event, all right, I'll come back to the notion of the terminological note. So what we have here in the framework here is the following. This is going to be your ex ante inputs. All right, so I have your ex ante inputs in round T, and you're going to have your ex post output in round T. All right, so you have ex post output in round T. Here you're going to have your ex ante inputs in round T plus 1. All right, ex ante inputs in round T plus 1. And you're going to have your ex post output in round T plus 1. All right, and so now we're going to continue with our notation here. And I'm going to say we're going to have the means of production of corn. So corn is going to be the industry, okay? It's going to be a corn model. All right, so we're going to say corn is going to be equal to 1. It's going to be a basic system. It's going to be an input as well as an industry. So this is going to be equal to A11. A11 is going to be equal to, I'll make that equal to 5 quarters of corn. Again, the lowercase x is going to represent the physical units, and 1 is going to represent the physical units for that commodity. So 5x1 represents 5 quarters of wait, let me see if I can get a little bit of that glare out. Okay, sorry for the glare, guys. Like I said, I'm trying to get some better ones up as well. Right, but so this then becomes the seed, right? So this is going to be equal to the corn as seed, all right? And it's going to be for round T. All right, I'm going to assume here that we're going to have a labor input. Now, with the surplus model, we introduced a labor input. I haven't said anything about the labor input yet. This is the first introduction of the labor input. Actually, Sraffa is also not going to speak about the labor input until chapter 3, actually, where he starts talking about the variability of labor. Specifically, we're going to talk about the notion of the wage in Sraffa, but in any event, for our purposes, we're going to introduce a labor input, and we're going to say that that labor input is going to be equal to 1 unit of labor. Right? Now that's going to be an important point. We're going to maintain this assumption that the aggregate, in this case the only unit of labor, is going to always be equal to 1 unit. Okay, this is going to be corn farming labor. corn farming labor. All right, now this is going to be equal to 1 units of labor. All right, unit of labor. In other words, you can think of it as the aggregate hour, or you can think of it as the aggregate labor input. I'll always keep the aggregate equal to 1, and I'll make it equal to a physical unit. Sraffa does a similar thing in his model, but what Sraffa will do, or I said, and what Sraffa will do, is he'll make the labor input equal to 1 scalar. He makes it equal to 100%. He goes to the share approach. I'm going to just kind of ratchet it down a notch here, and I'm going to say I like the idea of keeping the total labor input equal to 1, but instead of just 1 share, I'm going to make it 1 hour. And so that means that when we get to the different industries, we're going to say that, well, that means that the wheat industry, let's say, is going to have 2/3 of that hour, and the iron industry is going to have 1/3 of that hour, and then I'm going to express the value forms that way. It really makes the price-value relation, especially when it comes to the wage form, very transparent. You'll see this as I work through the various different numeraire. It's really nice, and I take that from Sraffa, and again, the idea is adopting the physical units. I should probably say a little bit more about that in terms of the given commodities. I mean, nowhere in here yet have I introduced the idea of the coefficients. We're going to get to the coefficients when we're going to be arriving at the Frobenius roots of our systems, which is necessary in order for us to find the standard ratio or the maximum rate of profit. I'll come to that. But at this point, all I'm doing here, and I did this with the original lectures on the or the first lectures on the subsistence system, is we're looking at the levels, at the quantity of wheat, the quantity of iron, the quantity of labor, and we're going to have here the quantity of units of labor, again, the aggregate hour. So in any event, this is going to be our given structure of production. So this is 5 quarters of seed and 1 hour of corn farming labor at the beginning of the harvest, right, produces at the end of the harvest here. All right, so we're going to take here, produces at the end of the harvest an output Q1 equal to 8 quarters of corn, around T. All right, so now we begin to see what's happened. Okay, so this says here, again, this is going to be the notion of Quenet's net output, right? Because you see here, this is where Quenet saw, and the Physiocrats saw, again, in France, in an agricultural system, an agricultural nation, as opposed to England, which is a little bitty island, which was more of an industrial nation. The French Physiocrats perceived the reality of the net output. They erroneously conceived it only in its expression in agriculture, because in agriculture it's very clear. And Marx talks about how the value form for the Physiocrats was not very developed. They didn't, because they couldn't understand what we would see in Sraffa's framework, the cross industry and the cross commodity relations that we see inherent in the price form. But what they did do is they understood the notion of circulatory, the circular flow framework, and what Marx says the notion of capital, where capital here is going to be that net output, which is then going to be the mechanisms by which that zigzag approach to the tableau économique that Quenet does manifest. We'll go through that in another lesson. I'll go through and show you a simple way we can understand Quenet's zigzag, and I have a simple model based on models such as these. But in any event, this is what we have. Now, this is going to be our given structure of production. Now, we're going to come over here. And we're going to say, well, there's going to be a round of production times T2. So this is going to be the means of production of corn for the corn industry at round T plus 1. I said T plus 1, I mean T plus 2, I mean T plus 1, the next round of production. And this, we're going to assume, is going to be equal to 5 quarters of corn, just like before. We're going to assume that the system does not grow. This is going to be equal to the labor input in round T plus 1, which is also equal to 1 hour of labor. And then here we're going to have the gross output of corn in round T plus 1, which is again going to be equal to 8 quarters of corn. All right? So we can see what's happening here, okay? We can see that with respect to the means of production, we're going to have this question, okay? Now this tells us here, okay, that in the next round of production T plus 1, we need 5 quarters of seed as means of production. And the question is, where do we get those means of production as seed? Where do they come from? And we say, well, the input in round T plus 1 comes from the output in round T. All right, so from round T's output, we take out of those 8 quarters, we deduct 5 for the next year's harvest or the next round's harvest. And what that does is that leaves us with a magnitude here of a new output here, which is going to be, in our numeric example, equal to 3/4 of corn. All right, let me come, actually I'm going to take this down this way. Okay, this is going to come here, and this is going to be equal to 3/4 of corn. All right, is equal to 3/4 of corn. All right, and we're going to see the same thing is going to occur as we move across our rounds of production. A11T plus 2 is equal to 5/4. That means that we have here we have to have quarters of corn coming from the previous output, and that leaves us here with the round T plus 1. 1 is equal to 3/4. This is going to be round T is equal to 3/4. Okay, now there you begin to see where the net output comes in, right? So now we have our net output. Okay, our net output is going to be the distribution, is going to be the production of those 3/4 of corn. And we're going to see that in our system, that's going to express itself in in a non-growing manner. It's going to be a stationary state. Now, the question becomes, what do we do with these 3/4 of corn? Now, before we get to that, what I want to point out is this. Okay, what we're going to be seeing here, let me take this one here, it's purple. What we're going to be seeing here is the following, okay? This is going to be equal to the quantity of labor, L1, which is equal to 1 hour. Okay, that's going to be, because we have here, the 5/4 are going to come out of the previous round of production. So these 5/4 are going to be, out of the 8 quarters, 5/4 are going to go back in as the capital input. That gives us the 5/4 that go in as that capital, quote unquote, capital input, or means a production input more proper, associated with the living labor. That means when we deduct out that, we are left with a quantity of pure labor input and a quantity of pure net output. And what we're seeing, and with the labor theory value in its macro context, and you need to look at the developments of the labor theory value. I think it's really important to consider those developments. Consider the work by Riccardo Bellafiore in 2014 and 2012 in the Cambridge Journal 2012, in the book that he and I co-edited in 2014, he speaks really clearly about the macro context of the labor theory of value. I'm not saying I agree with everything that he says there. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying that this is where the development of the labor theory of value in this macro context comes in. This is the relationship that we find with the new interpretation and the Duino-Foley approach to the transformation, because what's happening here is a congruency between the quantity of living labor as hours and the quantity of net output as quarters, in this case, as physical structure of output. And so too, in every round of production, there's going to be L1T plus 1 is equal to 1 labor unit, or 1 hour, is going to be congruent with respect to the net output. Now, in a value relationship, what we can do in a value relation is that we can set these two equal, right? In the value relation, we can set these two equal. In a non-value use-value relation, all we're doing is we're establishing congruency between the quantities of productive hours on the input side, quote unquote, and the quantities of newly produced quarters of corn or newly produced output on the net output side. So we have this relationship here. Now this is what ties in the two different expressions of our value added equal value to the net product. And I'll tell you here what's happening. Sraffa talks about it here. He's going to look at the value expressions on the labor side is going to be expressed in the normalization in paragraph 10. And the valuization on the net output side of the coin as a normalization that we find in paragraph 12. All right, and that's going to be true according to all regimes, all rounds of production. This fundamental relationship between the living labor and the net output, between the productive hours of living labor and the newly produced quantities of net output is going to be, you could call that the cement, if you will, the tether, if you will, between the value and the physical structures of production, right? So that's what's happening here, I argue, with respect to the relation. Now, with that, then you begin to see the following, okay? If you can understand the net output, okay, is going to be this relationship. Okay, well, consider it here. Let me put. I'll leave it down here. Okay, I'm going to just do one of them here. Okay, what we're going to have is this. All right. So this is going to be on the income account side. All right. Here you're going to have your income account side, and then here we're going to have your output account side. All right. This goes fully in Michael 1999 income and output accounts. Note that they begin with the output account and go to the income account. I see this as a macroeconomic accounting identity or accounting relation. So I call this when I'm teaching this as macroeconomic accounting. You can think of this as a macroeconomic T-table, where on the income account, the revenues. So income account, you can think of this as the revenues, all right? And output account, you can think of the expenditures. All right, that's in terms of your macro account, right? It's really easy in expenditures. All right, it's really easy to conceive of it that way. But note here that the whole micro-macro distinction that we find in Orthodox economics just breaks down. I mean, that's certainly for clear, because there is no there's no necessary, these relations of so-called micro and macro are here at the micro level of the one commodity model. But in any event, so what we're having is this. So we're going to be looking at the income account. We're going to have here. So I'm going to define lowercase y is going to be productivity of labor times the total quantity of labor in the economic system. This is going to be equal to national income. All right. So our national income is going to be equal to the productivity of labor multiplied by the quantity of living labor. On the output account side, we're going to have our aggregate expenditure. All right, so this then becomes our aggregate expenditure. All right, and our aggregate expenditure is going to be equal to here, the price of net output times the quantity of net output. Okay, and so this is going to be, in vector terms, there's going to be a vector of output and a vector of prices. Okay, and so what we have here is going to be the following. This is going to be the express. This is going to be the value. This is going to be the value of the net product. All right. We call this the value of the net product. All right. This is what Sraffa identifies in paragraph 12 of his book. What he does there is the residual. What Sraffa does is this. He'll say that PQ minus, I'll call it PQ1, P11 plus PA21, A12 is what he do, right? Is P1, and that's what he would do, right? So he would take the gross output minus the means of production, but what that is going to just be equal to the net product, all right? And so that's what Sraffa does is here. Of course, Sraffa is going to be more complex, all right? He's going to do that, or we adopt here, all right? We're going to do that approach there, but the point is that you're going to have the expenditure side on use values and the income side and the revenue side in terms of labor productivity, right? It's going to be the productivity of labor. And so here you have your double entry bookkeeping. This is going to be equal to the wage revenue plus the profit revenue, right? Gross wages plus gross profits. This is going to be equal to, and I'll put like this right here, this is going to be equal to consumption expenditures plus investment expenditures. Consumption expenditures plus investment expenditures. Investments expenditures is going to be equal to that. All right, and so that gives us here, again, you would say national income is equal to aggregate labor productivity plus aggregate labor is equal to W plus Z, and Z is going to be the definition for aggregate profits, is going to be equal to here, aggregate expenditure is going to be equal to the price of net output times net output is going to be equal to C plus I. All right, and so now you have your double entry macroeconomic bookkeeping, and so now what we're going to see then becomes the relationship here is one of ascertaining how out of the revenue we get savings, right? at both, we're going to see the propensity to save of wage revenue and the propensity to save of profit revenue, and then how that's related to the theory of investment. All right, and so with that, and this is all within a one commodity model, and with that, what you're able to do is you're able to build your model, and we'll do that, okay? And so then we say, all right, so we take this to the next level, all right? First thing we got to do is we got to start identifying, when we're moving into this, we got to first start identifying the what we call the productivity parameters. Okay, again, I take a lot of this out of Foley and Michael. Foley and Michael, 1999, Growth and Distribution. That's a fantastic book, first edition. Hopefully we'll get a second edition out. I know there's been some talk about that. It's certainly very much needed, and it would be very well received. I certainly would use it. But in that book, we get the we're going to get the breakdown of the economic system in terms of, I like to think of it in terms of the physical structure of production, and then we consider the relations of distribution on the income account and relations of expenditure on the output account. So we have here, we begin with the physical structure of production. Okay, so we have here our physical structure. All right, and so we say, all right, in our physical structure of production, we're going to have the following, right? We're going to consider it's going to just simply be this. Okay, we're going to have it at the time t. A11t is going to be equal to 5 quarters. L1t is equal to 1 hour. That's going to produce here an output Q1 is equal to 8 quarters, leaving us a net output Y1 equal to 3 quarters. That's given. All right. Now from there we can introduce what we call the productivity parameters. Okay. And so with that we're going to have our different productivity parameters. All right. Productivity parameters. This again parameters. All right. This parameters. This comes from Foley and Michael. I'll put it up here. This is going to be Duncan, Foley, and Thomas Michael. All right, it's going to be 1999. It's called Growth and Distribution, Harvard University Press. Distribution. Excellent book. Used throughout the heterodoxy. I used it in my dissertation and then some, and so do other people. Very good stuff. Came back from a conference in Mexico. We had some really good scholars in both Brazil and Mexico and Argentina and all over, and in the U.S., everywhere, in Europe, that are doing really good work with the framework that's developed there. So in any event, productivity parameter. Now, what we're going to do here with the productivity parameters, we're going to come up with 3 ratios. Okay, and those 3 ratios are going to take into account only 3 of these parameters: the physical structure production. The physical input of C, that's X1. All right, the physical the so-called means of production or so-called capital input, the labor input, and your net productivity. Okay, so the first one we begin with here, we say, all right, the first productivity parameter is going to be the net productivity of labor. All right, so we come here. This is the net productivity of labor. All right, your net productivity of labor we're going to call Y. Y is going to be equal to uppercase Y over L. Y is going to be in terms of the physical output. In our numeric example, this is going to be 3 quarters for every 1 hour is equal to 3 quarters per hour. And sometimes I'll just use the L or the XL interchangeably to represent my physical labor units. But again, you're going to begin seeing how keeping the labor units as actual hours as actual units is going to be very interesting and very transparent in terms of the price. Second one we're going to have is going to be the means of production output ratio. All right, the second one we have here is going to be the means of production output ratio, or the capital output ratio. Means of production net output ratio. Net output ratio. All right, this is so-called the productivity of capital. All right, is how it's referred to here. Productivity of capital. All right, it's here. I call this rho. I know that in some of the recent expressions that it's going to be often expressed as psi. I'm going to keep it according to the Foley and Michael designation in 99, and I'm going to call it rho. This is going to be equal to the net output over the means of production, right? So you can see why this is productivity of labor, net output over labor, and you can see where this is the productivity of capital, net output over capital. So it's going to be the net output over the labor input, the net output over the means of production or the capital input, which here is going to be a pure number. This is going to be means of production. Yes, this is going to be equal to 3/4 of corn over 5/4 of corn. This is going to be equal to 0.6. All right. Now, what we're going to be able to show that this is also equal to the maximum rate of profit R. All right. This is going to be equal to the maximum rate of profit. Maximum rates of profit. All right, it's gonna they're gonna come to coincide. All right, when you read Sraffa, this is gonna be, he calls it coincident ratios. All right, coincident ratios. All right, he refers to coincident ratios. So they're not exactly. So this is going to come from the productivity side, if you will. The physical structure side is going to give you your net output capital ratio, and the maximum rate of profit is going to be a distribution side. It's going to be specifically the regime of distribution at a particular level when we have pure profit remuneration. So it's a coincidence that they coincide. But in any event, what we're going to have in terms of your graph, all right, this is going to be equal to the vertical intercept. I'm going to show the graph. All right, vertical intercept, and we're going to put the graph up in productivity space, where the vertical intercept is going to be labor productivity, and the horizontal intercept is going to be capital productivity. All right, now a horizontal intercept, and we're going to put it in so-called capital productivity. We're going to put it in net productivity. I mean, in factor input, quote unquote. I know that a lot of heterodox have a problem with calling capital, and capital labor factor inputs, etc. But whatever, and the nomenclature notwithstanding, right? We're going to put it in a space of what we would think of as factor productivity. And then the last thing we're going to have is the output capital, is the capital labor ratio, all right, or the means of production labor ratio. All right, it's going to be the means of production labor ratio. This means of production labor ratio is going to be the capital labor ratio is going to be the proxy of the technique of production. Is going to be equal to the capital labor ratio. All right, capital labor ratio, right? We're going to call this lowercase k. It looks like a little r, I mean capital R, but it's not. It's my lowercase k. This is going to be k is going to be equal to the means of production A11 over L1. Now you're going to be taking the inputs in relation to each other, right? And so this is going to be equal to 5/4 of corn over 1 hour of labor is equal to 5/4 per unit of labor. And then this, and related to the graph, this is going to be the slope. All right, slope is going to be the negative. Negative of the capital labor ratio is going to be the slope of the growth distribution schedule. All right, and so we're going to show that. All right, and I have all this in mostly handwritten. A lot of it's handwritten, but I'll put it on the website for people to be able to use to go through. All right, and so then we can draw that in terms of our distribution space. Right, I'm erasing it here, but I'm going to take labor productivity, so-called capital productivity, and I'm going to juxtapose them on the graph. We're going to have a distribution. We're going to have a productivity schedule, is how you can refer to it, which is going to also be equal to your consumption and your distribution schedules, your growth distribution schedules as well. But really, we begin first with the productivity schedule. All right, and that's what we have here. All right, so again, we haven't introduced any relations of distribution or growth, but we have our productivity schedule. All right, and our productivity schedule is going to be drawn in input productivity space. All right, if you want to call it factor, input productivity or factor productivity space. All right, which means if we're going to have factor productivity space, we're going to have the following, right? It's going to be this. All right, so we're going to take our factor productivity space is going to be here. All right, this then is the productivity of labor on the vertical axis and productivity of capital on the horizontal axis. Okay, and so what you have is this. All right, so this is going to be the productivity of labor, which is going to be equal to Y over L. Okay, this is going to be, let me put it out here. Okay, this is going to be equal to the productivity of capital, all right, which is going to be equal to, I'm going to put it right here, right? We're going to make it equal to that, and so this is going to be, this is going to be right here. All right, this one here and this one here. All right, so this is going to be equal to the productivity of capital. This is going to be a productivity of capital is equal to 0.6, okay? And this is going to have my productivity of capital going to be here. This is going to be 3, all right? There and there, and you're going to come down here, there, and there, okay? This is going to be equal to Y over L. This is going to be equal to Y is equal to 3 quarters per unit labor. All right, and so what we have here is this. This becomes the growth distribution schedule, all right, which is going to come right, this becomes a productivity schedule, which is going to go right there. All right, so this is your productivity schedule. Put it this way, okay, this is going to be your productivity schedule. Productivity schedule. And what we're saying is that the productivity schedule is going to be equal to negative the capital output ratio, negative 1/5 over 1. And how do you see that? Well, this is going to be the dollar per unit, the output per unit labor, and what you have is this. All right, so this then becomes, all right, we take it like this. You're going to take this one down like this, or you take this like this, all right, this like this, okay, and this like this, exactly, all right, and so then you can see that this is going to be equal to 1, all right, this is going to be equal to the scalar value of 1, this is going to be equal to, it's going to be negative $1 per L and negative $2 per L. And so you see that the entire thing is going to be here, right? Which is going to be equal to negative, unit output, I'm sorry. I didn't do price yet. Unit of net output per unit L, negative 2 unit of net output per unit L. This whole thing is going to be negative 5 units of net output per unit L, which is equal to the negative of the capital labor ratio. All right, and so that you can there see, all right, and because this is going to be equal to 1 unit over L, 2 unit over L, 3 unit over L, and there you can see how the productivity schedule shows all the different relations of the economic system given a technique, right? This is going to be a specific technique, right? And so that then becomes the relationship. Then what we say here, we say, all right, well, this is going to express your net output. This is going to be the pure, this is going to be the pure labor expression of your net output, and this is going to be the pure capital expression of your net output. I just put it here, it's going to be pure labor expression. All right, I'll keep that, what that means. It's a little bit nebulous, but the idea is that you're going to have, from the perspective of the distribution of the output, that's going to be more geared toward the labor. So the pure labor expression is going to be the pure productivity of your net output in terms of your labor input, and this is going to be your pure capital expression. All right, pure capital or means of production or means of production expression. Okay. Now it's from there that we begin to see that we add the distributive and the growth relation. Right. So that's going to be your productivity schedule. We saw it's there. Now we say here, all right. Well, what we're going to say here is that we're going to have a net output. So we begin with our normalization. We say, all right, that the net productivity of labor times the total output of labor times the total labor input is going to be equal to the price of the net output times the quantity of the net output. And you can think of that ladder in vector form, right? And so then you're going to have here, all right, so this then is going to give you this. This is going to be your this is national income on the income account side, aggregate expenditure on the output account side. These are going to be the income account side. So we have income slash revenues. All right, income slash revenue. And this is going to be output slash expenditures. all right, expenditures. All right, and so there we then begin to see, again, we express it in this, and again, this is paragraph 10, this is paragraph 12, the normalization, again, that we see in a lot of different economic theories. Again, it's in the new solution as well. And so then we break our revenue structure down. So this is going to be national income is going to be equal to your wage revenue plus your profit revenue. Aggregate expenditure is going to be equal to your consumption, your wage revenue, your profit revenue, your aggregate expenditure, your consumption expenditure, and your investment expenditure. All right? And so then the question becomes, how do we get our savings, which are drawn on the revenue side, and brought into equality with investment on the expenditure side? Right? And so this then becomes the key for when we say macroeconomic identities or macroeconomic equilibrium, macroeconomic balance. And what we see are that actually different theories have different approaches to this framework. We're going to look at it from a from what you can see mainly as a classical framework, but here then we're able to look at the relationship here. Or we're going to say on the income account side that aggregate savings S, right, is going to be equal to the savings propensity out of wages times the wage revenue plus the savings propensity out of profits times the profit revenue. All right, and so where SI here, where lowercase si is going to be equal to the savings propensity. Savings propensity, and so out of revenue I, of revenue of type I, and then revenue of type I, where I is going to be equal to either wage revenue or profit revenue, right? And so we see then that your aggregate saving. Now, this is the so-called Passanetti condition, and Passanetti in 1962 developed the framework building on the so-called Keynesian or post-Keynesian or Cambridge theory of income distribution, where we're looking specifically at the relationship between the net output and the on the revenue side and the investment on the expenditure side is related to there. So, but the point is that there are going to be particular properties. One property being that the savings out of wages has got to be less than the savings out of profits. In fact, we're going to be assuming in our little framework here that the savings out of wage revenue is going to be zero. That's Koletsky's assumption that workers spend what they get. Workers do not save, that all the savings is going to come out of profit revenue. But that savings relationship is going to be mapped over to this investment relationship here. All right, and so this is what now I put the causality this way, all right, but really you can think of the causality going either way. The point being this, all right, what we see here is that if we have a causality running, if it comes from savings to investment, that's going to be equal to what we would call a classical causality, right? That it's going to move from the revenue side to the expenditure side, and it's going to have a classical implications as in terms of the classicals are going to understand closure on the revenue side. This has relevance in terms of how you're going to close the distribution system with respect to the wage versus the profit. I haven't even got into that. It's a whole interesting story in Sraffa's framework that is yet to be developed and yet to be truly appreciated and uncovered. And I'm really late here. Let me finish this up, all right? I don't want to make this so long, all right? But we're going to have, and then also, this is going to, if you move from investment to savings, this is going to be the post-Keynesian closure, all right? And here, you're going to have, what we're going to see is the post-Keynesian closure is going to move from the investment relation to the growth relation to the profit relation. Now, what we do is we develop it, right? So we have the following. I'm going to keep this one simple. I'm going to come back to the framework. But what we're going to have is this. All right, we're going to take our system, okay, and we're going to look at it in terms of the net output of the system, right? Okay, you know what? I'm going to leave it at that, all right? I'm done. As I see, it's too long, all right? I'll come back to you in 45 minutes. Whoa, no one's going to watch this. That was going to be the introduction to the income-output model. I'm going to start another one in the next lecture on this, and I'll return to it, okay? Thank you very much for hanging in there for those who watch. Bye.